Hey everyone, welcome back to the arena. I'm MD, joined here by our co-host Matt Kovachis, and once again a really special guest that we can't wait to get into. Once again, love and appreciation to those that continue to follow us, really feeling the engagement and the support, and just really motivating to want to continue to create great conversations.
Love that intro. You introduced me as Matt Kovachis today. That's a first. We've got a phenomenal guest here. This is Naftali Moses. He is a personal coach, helping people awaken to their humanity, which is a really interesting. It really grabbed my attention, and he does a lot of work that I've seen on social media and just promoting. As he said before this conversation, talking about the things that most people don't want to talk about. So with that, Naftali, why don't you just provide an introduction of who you are and how you got to where you are today?
Well, yeah, okay, I'll do the one sentence answer. Well, I love the way you put it. Yes, I'm a personal coach. I'm located out here in Los Angeles, California. And I guess what I really do with people is wake them up. I feel like that's the best way to describe it because it's unique and it's individualized and it's personal. And I think that's the only way to really create change is with the individual. So the goal here is to create as many individuals as I can so that we can actually start creating change. It's no more blanket umbrellas, but perhaps maybe individual people going out there and putting out what's unique and authentic. And that's really what I want to see in the world. I want to see more real, more truth. Because I think that if we have that, I think we could start really building and building real love.
Beautifully said, and focusing on you because there's going to be so much that we can dive into with regards to your perspective and all of those things, but take us a step back and further into who you are leading up to what brought you into this field and why is this so important to you? What are your life experiences leading?
Well, let me think, 'cause I mean, that's not an easy question to answer. There's a whole list of inspirations. Really, I think it's the accumulation of all of my experiences more than just one. I really think you consider who your parents are, the family that I was raised with, 7 brothers total, even being born religious Jew, all of those things had a serious impact on my life and where I wanted to go with my life. And, I think about it now and it's like, okay, well, what was the main factor? What would I really say it is? Really that I was raised with a family that instilled strong values. And that was something that really started making me go out into the world, and I realized that most people can't communicate. Most people don't know what they want. And if most people already lived in the reality that they wanted, regardless of their profession or craft, couldn't even ask for those things from other people. So I kind of realized that most people are sleeping. They're not really living with a purpose or any kind of meaning in their life. So really having to wrestle for food, with older brothers that are probably going to have it their way over your way, well, that was a big factor in my life. And I also really think that, dating in the 21st century is a unique experience. And that was something that really shaped why I'm here. I have to say that a relationship is what's going to do it, or it's really going to tip that ball. And then everything else in my life was like, oh, I know where I am. I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. And I think it happened about when I was 21 years old. So 3 years ago, I guess you could say I really started discovering myself and then also utilizing all of my other skill sets and I guess you could say the things that developed my persona throughout this whole process. And so as that started to happen, I started to realize that people would just call me, be like, hey, I need help with this thing. Hey, I need help with this thing. Or, hey, you know how to deal with this. Or, hey, you know how to deal with that. And my whole life just studying psychology and being raised on the Old Testament gave me a really good idea about how people think. And I know it's a little interesting because as a religious individual, most of the time they think that diminishes your ability to contribute on a psychological level or even a personal level. I really think that it shaped the way that people think as a whole. So the most beautiful thing is I was given the framework to just go out and already help people as it is.
So you mentioned 3 years ago you start this like you mentioned discovering yourself. What does that process look like? How are you doing that? What's coming up? Like what's coming up emotionally as you're going through this process? Just talk through that whole journey.
I think it starts off with this dying need to be recognized, a little bit like an inferiority complex. Being the youngest of 7 or 6, really one didn't make it, passed away at a young age. There's this need to be seen, this need to be recognized. And most importantly, you got to have a voice. So this was never something conscious for me until I was about 21. And I think that when it became conscious, it's when it started to hurt more when I didn't do things for myself. It's when it really started to sting, when I would do things that were clearly destructive. So a lot of things started to open up for me when I no longer looked at life as it's something that it needs to interact with me more than I'm trying to really interact with myself in life. So there's a big frame shift that happened when I was around 21, and it happened after a relationship, and I think that was one of the things that allowed me to wake up. And this wake-up call was very interesting because I immediately started to gravitating towards growth. I'm sure you guys have had that too, somewhere in your 20s, where a click happens, and it's everything that you've been taught to chase, to run after, is irrelevant. It's not the money you make, it's not how tall you are, it's not how muscular you are, but it's genuinely, what is this question about what is life at all? And so I guess that started to happen on a personal level. I started to become far more introspective. I started to look more into my past. I started to look more into my behaviors. I started to see why I was so destructive as a person. What really started waking me up is realizing what a sick motherfucker I am. And I really don't think that most people are aware of that until they see what they do to other people. I just needed one relationship and a little bit of being a fuckboy to realize that this is not the path of a man. And this is not the path that I want to choose in my life. So of course, when the crisis happened, it was like I could open my eyes and see for the first time. Now, the wild part is although you might think that's comforting, it's actually the inverse. It wasn't very comforting. When I saw what I had to do for myself, I was scared shitless, and I started disassociating like this. I tried drowning myself with as much work as humanly possible. 3 years ago, I was working as a trainer. That's why I got really good at people. I would just practice psychology on people that I was training, and it's great, zero accountability. If I give them bad advice, I'm just the trainer, right? But if I give them good advice, well, I'm the trainer who gives good advice. So they made me really good at just helping people. I would just practice with them, and then a whole list of things would come to the surface. So there's a certain point where throughout this whole process, I just started, after that breakup, there was just a lot of pain. And by the way, it wasn't just one breakup, it was a series of breakups, really, and just heartbreak, heart-wrench, and relationships that couldn't last, not even with women, but with my friends. And the most wild part was that even in the religious community I was in, there was no solace. There was the same shit going on there. And so I'm left being a unique individual, because we all are, whether you like it or not. There's authenticity in every single one of us. And then you're also left with what you have to do for you, and how nobody in history has ever done it before, and that you're going to be the first to do it, and everybody's going to have to say something about it. So that's where I was at. I was losing my shit. Because after that relationship, it hurt when I didn't do me. It stung. And I was looking to just take as much work as I could. I was working from 6 a.m. to 11 p.m. And then, of course, when nobody wants to just work with you because you're becoming a soulless robot, that's when everything after that started to come closer and closer. I started to realize my dark nature, my manipulative nature, a part of me that was like a sexual animal, and I think a lot of men are never in touch with this, that every single one of us is. And I had to integrate all of that in the heart of a religious community where, hey, if you're that guy, good luck getting set up with the neighbor's daughter, because that's not how it's going to work. They want the safest, weakest little guy that they'll set up with their cute daughter. And that's the crazy thing, and that's what I was raised with, fascinating as it is. And so throughout this whole process, I started realizing, oh my God, there's so much responsibility. And this is like the first time, and it wasn't like I heard it from anybody else. It was a deeply intuitive process. It was an instinctive process, and I really think that would put me into that place is how much it hurt to be where I was at. It hurt so much. I couldn't stand living another day as that lie that I was for everybody else. And one day, I heard this voice in my head, and I can't really explain it other than just like an absolute divine realization as I woke up and I heard this voice, and it said, "Are you a good person?" There is nothing in my whole life that made me more pale and more shocked simultaneously. And is also responsible for where I am right now, because I realized that I was not a good person. I just wasn't a bad one. And I really think that for somebody who really puts morality where it is and values family, love, truth, hard work, purpose, I wasn't living my true life. And I think with that, I experienced all the consequences.
Thanks for sharing all of that. And I want to connect back to the desire for recognition. I actually read a book recently that Adlerian psychology, I don't know if that's maybe where you're getting that from, but you spoke about how it showed up for you and maybe you have more concrete examples there, but I want you to help with people who listen to this to be able to, I want people to be able to recognize their desire for recognition and how that shows up in the world. And maybe we can focus on men, generally speaking.
Wow.
But maybe help in part, like, what are some of the more common ways that that shows up in people?
You're going to hate this, but this is actually, what you're talking about is not a small conversation. Look, there's a few things that people have an absolute need for. Whether they like it or not, they will get it either on a subconscious level or a conscious level. And the ways that you go about and get it are going to be determined by the value system that you have. Because there's really no reason to strive towards greatness unless there's a value or belief that you have that is about challenging yourself so that you can see what you can do in the world. So what I often notice is that men have this very big split that they either like this or not. And I was reading this book the other day, and it was profound. A profound line in it that really blew my mind. And it was that men become exceptionally destructive when they don't feel useful. Now, the kind of destructive that we're looking at now isn't physical or external as you think. It's actually very deep and personal. The majority of suicides are men. If men don't feel useful in a society, they begin to become self-destructive. And if you eventually eliminate what men are useful for, you begin to destroy society within its own bubble. And so I was thinking about it, and it was like, well, the need for recognition. There's a few things that men need. I think all human beings need, whether they like it or not. But the way that we get it, women are far better at meeting those needs than men are. Because a lot of men lack capacity, and a lot of them also think that their capacity is based off of what they create in the external world, which is also unfortunate. Those are also beliefs that really keep men weak. So there was something I actually realized myself, which is a lot of men have an attachment to power, significance, recognition, and approval. Now, that's exactly how you become weak. Now, the funny thing is that I realized this myself. It's like, well, how do you know the insecure guy, right? Like, you take the red pill dude. I can guarantee you there's a certain point where he's going to hit a wall with that narrative. He's going to have to expand that narrative because the narrative is now based off of his career and what he tells other people. So he's not really believing in the things that he says. He's attached to the things that he says because it makes him feel powerful or significant. So now look, we have to accept this as men. And I mean this. It's a dark thought, it's a dark realization because you're going to have to start putting yourself out there, which means that you're going to have to stand naked with all of your authentic needs and desires, and that you're going to have to be the one that backs them up. Nobody else. Not mom or not dad. You're going to have to be the one that does it. Now, the beautiful part about this is you don't have to do this alone. And I promise, when you don't do it alone, you create a brotherhood. And when you create that, you open a pathway towards purpose and meaning in your life. So a man really needs to ask himself an honest question. And I think men need to be very, very honest with themselves. Because if they don't think that they are absolute monsters, and every single one of them is, I don't care how you paint it, and it's something it'll provide a lot of peace for men when they accept that their dark nature is very, very deep, and that you can't run from the parts of yourself, and that if you think that you can be this nice guy and exist in reality, not only are you wrong, you'll become one of the most manipulative men, and you won't even know it. So the worst part about a man that represses the need for power and significance and recognition is that he gets it on the back end. And people can do that through victimization, right? Which is a big thing. I'm sure that you guys deal with that a lot. But have you noticed how they can actually utilize that to get your attention, your recognition, and your approval through pity? And now the same thing goes through power. When they can do that long enough through enough people, eventually they start realizing how manipulative they are. Or if they do, which is kind of what happened to me, you start waking up and you go, hey, well, why the hell would I want to manipulate my friends? Manipulate these girls? Or even play this character so that I get my needs met. Do I want to be strong? Do I want to be bold? Because that's courageous. And that is desirable across the board for men and women. Because it's truthful. It's honest. And so, I was never, growing up, you don't really get that. You know, you're tossed in a room full of boys and girls and they're all clueless. Everyone's fucking clueless about what they are. And then they grow up and then they realize why certain people turn to drugs, other people become sex addicts. Some people are just constantly seeking attention, and others are looking for the safe bet in everything in their life and never discover who they are. So, it's just about wanting more and raising your standard, and it's literally that simple. That you could want it on the back end, or you could start testing yourself by making a fool of you and getting rejected as many times as possible until you do. And I think that's a beautiful place to go, because that's actually where you discover who you are. Everything else and every other alternative is most likely an excuse.
So, I mean, that was all very eloquently said. You mentioned like you were looking at yourself and you're like, I'm not a bad person, but I'm not a good person. Mm-hmm. What does a good person look like? What is a good man? Maybe you don't have to be generalized if you want, but what makes a good person?
What I've noticed is if you need to say that you give charity, that's a great indicator that you're probably not a bad one. And I often notice that's what most people gravitate towards. It's like, oh, I do things for others. Remember that whole framework I was showing you before about attachment? Like, do you do things for others because you connect to that act of kindness, or because it allows other people to see you as that guy, and that makes you feel recognized? That makes you feel significant. So at the end of the day, goodness is a fascinating concept. And like, what makes a good man, and what exactly is goodness? And it's like, well, goodness doesn't exist if you're unconscious. It's just a product of survival, because people like it more, especially if you're a weaker type. It's much easier to be nice, right? So really, like, goodness is something that revolves around your level of consciousness about yourself. You know, the person that's truly being good is the one that's aware. The one that's most likely being manipulative is the one that's just like, hey, I'm being good. I'm doing the things that everybody says is good. And it's like, well, how about you start with yourself and start integrating the parts of you that make you fake? So I think it starts with the first thing, which is be real, right? Most people were real. They'd be composed of darkness and a lot of unauthentic and perhaps a lot of weak and unintelligent and not perfect. And then once you look at it at that point, you start realizing, well, to be a good man is, well, I'm going to have to lead myself to salvation. How about let's start there? And I realized that it starts with being selfish. There's a level of selfishness that a good man has that truly makes him kind. And I really think that if people don't find how selfish and centric they truly are by nature, deep, deep, dark roots, then how on earth would your branches ever touch heaven? And I found that very common, as a common theme across the board for so many men, and it's that they're just unconscious. They don't want to see that their behavior is truly fake. And the ones that really are good people are the ones that are looking for the truth in themselves, truth seekers, and those who fight for the truth. Those make strong men. They make very good men, because guess what? It's a forever process. As long as you're here, that's what you're going to be doing. And that happened for me. I woke up, I was looking for everything. I was trying to, I'm here for these people. I talk to these people and I give them solace. I give charity. 10% of my income a month goes to charity. The fact that I went there to as many narratives as possible, I was like, I'm not a bad person. And then I asked myself a question, what would make me a good person? Doing as much humanly possible for myself to discover all of what I am, to give all of that back to reality. Through fatherhood, through marriage, through brotherhood, and through your craft, through being a leader. And I realized, no. I had this ego. I was inaccessible. How on earth could I be a leader? I can't even lead myself. And that's when I really started this. It was like I had enough of the I did one thing for myself, let me become a coach. No, I did this so much to the point where people wanted to work with me. And then I said, okay, now I'm being a piece of shit. Here we go. This is how much I charge. And by the way, from that point, I never asked myself that question again, because I know I'm doing good, because I'm living authentically. And if I'm living authentically, that means I'm living honestly. And that means I'm here doing what I'm supposed to be doing for the time being. And that will change. When you're not running away, when you know that you can be a good person, and you could only be a good person when you're strong. How many people are willing to wrestle that beast that they are until it's on a leash?
Yeah, I mean, one of the concepts you brought up was, take a man, for example, is just a man will feel happy when he feels useful or contributive to his world around him. And you talked about how people will only do that at times if it gets recognized. It's one of those things. It's like if a tree falls in the forest and nobody hears it, did the tree really? It's like the saying goes, like if a tree falls in the forest and nobody hears it, did a tree really fall in the forest? Essentially, right? And it's like, does that ideology carry through as to why people won't make an act of kindness out into the world? I just think about an example of being charitable to somebody who's unhoused in the streets of Chicago that we live in, right? It's like, will people do that without the recognition? And if not, like, why? Is it that they don't trust that they'll feel some sort of fulfillment or connection to their authentic self, and like they only know the act of service associated with the good feeling of the recognition that comes with it?
So I like how you mentioned that. So that's exactly what makes masculinity what it is. It's not associated to recognition or worth. There's personal purpose and personal power within personal actions. And you become a very useful individual, right? Because we're talking about the lack of usefulness, right? Will make you feel exceptional. You'll be left to your own vices. You'll become incredibly either destructive in the world or self-destructive. I mean, look, you can clearly see that. You know, it's like the percentage of men that are committing suicide is absolutely disproportionate. And also suicide rate in general is disproportionate at the moment. So you could already establish that something is going wrong in the system, that there's a lack of humanity, and perhaps that there's a lack of connection to the things that we do because it's no longer enough to ourselves. And I think that's exactly where we need to start. It's like, how can we make these things enough for ourselves? So you mentioned something very profound there. And that's, you know, the amount of people that are so quick to getting on a phone with 3 hours with a person who's going through shit when they themselves are going through the same shit. I'm sorry, but the best thing you could tell your friend is the truth. I'm all fucked up. I can't do this. I need a therapist. You know, start there. You know, I need help. But it's interesting that I noticed that even the people in the worst situations are the ones that are the most accessible and are there to help the homeless in the street. And you know, this is something I experienced with a friend of mine, unfortunately. No longer a friend of mine. Somebody we've moved past it. But what I've noticed is that due to a declining, I guess you could say, the increasing naivete of men in general, and I think we're talking about men because there's men in the arena, so why not, that you undermine how bad your ego situation is right now in the 21st century. Because the worst thing you could tell yourself is you're ready when you're not. It's one of my favorite quotes. It just makes you less self-aware. So there was this one friend, and I was realizing, like, how deep does this go? There's eventually to the point where you will start putting down people that help others so that you make it seem like you yourself are on top of it all. It's called virtue signaling, and it's a very easy way to start accessing power and significance because other people recognize it. It's flaunting yourself. And I buy this guy dinner. I'm with all of my friends. We go to this fancy Japanese cuisine. And I look at the bill. I tipped him 10%. I said, don't look at it. I paid it. I covered it. Don't worry. Just wanted to know that you guys enjoyed it. And I really mean it. And I always ask myself this question: am I doing this for them to see me as Mr. Hotshot, or am I buying dinner because I love them? And if they never paid me back, and if I lost for good, and that tomorrow I didn't close a deal, would I still do it? And the answer is yes. My heart animates me to. You have to be really real with what your heart animates you to do, which a lot of people aren't. They like to make it something grandeur when it's really not. So I end up tipping the waiter. It wasn't a massive tip. The bill was a massive bill, though. So paid the overhead. As I walk outside, I notice that he's talking to the waiter, and he looks really, really mad. And he pulls out money, and he goes and he gives the waiter an extra $60. He comes outside to me, and he's like, "You piece of shit, you bully. I told you to fucking tip that waiter 20% more." And I looked at him, I was like, whoa, 1 second. You want to tip the waiter? You can tip the waiter. There's just one thing that you need to be saying, which is thank you. You're literally using this whole tip thing to hold it over me. And now this is something that's very interesting. I want you to pay attention to it and see how many people that you know do that. Is that they will hold even their smallest actions over people that they look up to. So I told him, I said, hey, you know, there's a homeless guy across the street. You want to give him a blowjob? And in fact, actually, you know, that person over there, do you have $500? I'm sure he needs it. The rent's getting a little heavy. And I said, you know what I find is so interesting? To your own friends, to the people that do things that are good for you, that you would still rather hold yourself in some way or another over them. So, do you want to know a particular quality that this person had? Niceness. But you know the guys like me? Very bold, very straightforward, very ambitious, very animalistic. I'm a whiteboard for projection and all of the things about them that they are, that they will never take accountability for. And it's a really wild discovery because not many people are talking about it. And I realized that unless you're going to start taking accountability, that you're just as capable as the men that perhaps you envy, which is the Cain and Abel story, right? Like, why do your own brother, you got a problem with? he's more favored by God. And what does God tell him? He's like, surely if you improve yourself, things will get better. What's the first thing that he does? Is he inquires of his brother. He talks with his brother and then strikes his brother behind his back. And then God comes to him and he goes, where's your brother? And he goes, am I my brother's keeper? That story right there is the nature of men and brothers. What do you think we are? We're brothers. And that's our baseline. If we don't know that about ourselves, if we don't know that story, how would we ever do anything to improve ourselves? And what's the one thing that God tells Cain? If you improve yourself, things will get better. And so, really, at the end of the day, is that these things need to be checked. An inferiority complex, not communicated to those around you with enough vulnerability and compassion, will create a manipulative motherfucker on the back end. But when you have an open space to communicate, everybody understands these things about one another. Hell, we're protectors. And I think that comes with a lot of capacity. And then when we start to create this kind of open conversation about what we are, we're no longer butterflies and dandelions and rainbows. We're human beings with deep, dark nature and tremendous complexity. And that we do this together. And when I noticed I created that, not only for people in my group, but everybody stops to no longer reject what they are. We start to work together. And I've seen something called harmony.
Do you equate that to... Yeah, and do you equate that, and are you therefore then very intentional about only establishing what we would call maybe horizontal relationships and breaking down and away from vertical relationships where there is that sort of inferiority complex of you're looking up to somebody, somebody's praising you, etc.?
And this is something that I've noticed. The higher I've gone up in the status, people project onto you more, and your circle gets smaller and smaller. Now, this only happened to me once I created something. It destroyed when I say destroyed, it destroyed my egotistical paradigm, where you had that linear thing, the dominance hierarchy, where if you're here, you can't communicate here unless you're here, and then you guys can see eye to eye. What I ended up doing is realizing how you treat the people under you. There's the people that you want to be like, that give you all the validation that you need. And then there's the people under you who are like these, not quite enough for you, but they give you all your validation. But then there's you in the middle alone. And that's the thing about the linear. You're alone, right? That's not a fulfilling life. But when you create this horizontal thing, it doesn't mean that you deconstruct people. It means that you live a personal existence, not looking to deconstruct others. We all have the bare bone humanities that allows us to see each other eye to eye. And we're no longer existing in, oh, if I climb this ladder, which is what I noticed why the ladder is comforting. And if I go up the status hierarchy, well, then I can control the way that I feel about myself. But here's the alternative. If I do the internal work, and I see the ugly in the beauty and the beauty in the ugly, and I can now start to even out this playing field to now I'm in control of the way that I feel about me. That's a lot of responsibility. You know, when I realized that, I was like, oh no, fuck it. Let me go back to scaling my business, right? And then you're like feeling good about yourself for the next 5 minutes. Or you're like, let me go approach 6 girls because I can do that and nobody else can. And then you're realizing like, oh my God, the way that I feel about myself, can I just hear it once? You disgust me. That's the dialogue that's running through so many men. Is they can't even sit alone with who they are, more or less even give themselves the bare bone acceptance to feel worthy of love for themselves before they have to go ahead and go about some monkey performance to get it from somebody else. Like, that's not something you should really be cautious of. So you even out the playing field, right? You start to interact with people on a plane. The dominance hierarchy doesn't exist anymore. I'm not climbing it because I want people to see me. I'm engaging with that system because there's more of me to be discovered there. And if it wasn't, I wouldn't go there. And I think a lot of people have a hard time accepting that, is that you need to know what you are so that you can be effective wherever you are. But sometimes it's not always what your ego likes to hear, is it?
Very well said. So, I mean, how do you help, when you coach people and through your content, how do you help people go from like a victim mindset, very simply put, to more of a growth empowered mindset? Like, how do you help people like discover and unlock that version of themselves from within?
Yeah, well, it's a good one. Well, one of them is you got to talk to them. You got to meet them where they're at. The most important thing, general information helps everybody, but nobody. Specific information is what's really going to help people, because the people that are really struggling, you have to make sure where they're at. So there's a few things I consider, like when I'm going to go help somebody, is their sexual behavior is a very, very important factor of an individual. A lot of the creativity is there. A lot of their personal power is there. And also see how honest they are with themselves. Because if they're watching porn all day and they're telling you that they want to get a hot girlfriend, you're like, we have a lot to work on an internal level before you could even go out in the world. Because if you're going to go out in the world with my conditions, it's going to be incredibly intimidating. So I think it's just really, it's personal, right? You listen to people, you see where they're at, you meet them where they need to be met. My God, man, like, you might have to realize that some people don't need a full refurnishment, and also some people don't need to know all the answers. They actually need to learn to live with grace. And then there are some individuals, and the ones that victimize the most are the hardest to help. And I'll tell you, the biggest victims are people pleasers and performers. They have something to say about everybody except themselves. And they are always innocent in every altercation. I find that too damn convenient. So I start there. I kind of like to see a little bit about the person's persona. And I often notice that the people that victimize the most are the least connected to their own aggression and their sexuality. Because if they were, they'd actually stand up for themselves. So it's often very interesting is that the victim is the most snake-like. They're hyenas. They're not quite lions. They're going to go for the crumbs, and when it's there, they're going to be vicious. So this is something very interesting. I brought one of my clients over for a Shabbat dinner. Shabbat's like Thanksgiving once a week. I was there with my family. My mom thought this guy was so sweet, really adorable Christian guy. Good looking too. And his whole life, everybody was this demon or Messiah. And I was like, interesting. There's something very convenient about that too. And I also noticed that his personality was repressed. And I was like, well, how did I notice his personality was repressed? He got everything he ever wanted all the time whenever he needed it. Spoiled, really. And then one day, I see him talking to this one girl, and I said, hey, you guys had chemistry. You think she's cute? And immediately, he didn't go from like, not my thing. He went from, there was no aggression or emotion to complete and total psychopathy, and sliced up that person, talking about, oh, no, she had tits like this, her skin was like that, oh, she had weird hair. I was like, whoa. 1 second, dude. We got a lot of work to do. And he's like, well, what do you mean? And I said, you went from sweet, nice guy to complete and total psychopath. And there was no humanity in between. So in relationship to the whole Shabbat thing that I was talking about, my mom was like, he's the sweetest kid I ever met. Let me tell you what happened a few days later after doing some of this work. I realized that he was missing a component that a lot of men demonize. Remember, the men that you feel inferior and judge a lot are just parts of you that you end up rejecting because you don't want to be like. Because you want to be this safe bet. You want to be this silent, sneaky motherfucker. And it's a very common thing. It's like, whether you like it or not, as two men, you're either capable or manipulative. Because if you're capable, you're very forward. And if you're not very forward, well, you're passive. And if you're passive, I'd watch out. Because you have a hidden intention. And I'm only saying that because that's true. And I've never seen it not be the case. So we're doing this one-on-one work. We're doing this deep dive, a lot of shadow work prior to this big session that we had together. And his rejection of his father was the narcissistic type, the capable type, the spokesman, the good-looking guy, the multiple women kind of guy, right? And he rejected all of those parts of him. And I always found it very interesting that the victim immediately rejects the things that have the harshest implications about them. Sometimes it'll pop up in your father. It'll pop up in other guys that you don't want to be like. Typically, it's in your family. And he had about 23 years of rage. Frothing at the mouth rage that came up to the surface that he never spoke up for himself. His voice changed. The way that he spoke to people changed. So much of him woke up on an internal level, he no longer talked like, hey, how are you? Nice to meet you. He had a different look in his eyes. He would always judge the guys like me who would go up to the girls and talk to them and spin them around and take them off the dance floor or take them back home. You guys want to know something crazy? Within 30 minutes, we went out after that session. He met a girl on a boardwalk and just walked with her to her dorm room. I guarantee you this, men are animals. And we are very, very capable animals. And I've seen this in people that you would least expect it from. So the next Shabbat I come by to my parents' house and I told them the whole thing about this client I was working with. She said, I don't believe that at all. And I said, there's a lot about men that you're unaware of. 200,000 years of evolution. You've killed things, and now you're like, I'm happy. Well, if I do MMA once a week, I should be okay. Look at me. No. You got to see something, and it's when you direct that towards good, you build like this. Because you look at the amount of alcohol out there, the amount of marijuana out there, the amount of suppressed rage out there, the amount of people pleasers out there. We're not even talking about the people on antidepressants. That's over 130 million Americans prescribe that shit. So now you're like kind of getting a little concerned about, and also the percentage of obese Americans too. Like, there's clearly something we're drowning right now, and it's that. I did that as somebody who even had access to it. I did it. And you're telling me that people who won't do that to themselves? They absolutely will. And they're going to be the first to pay for it. I at least have the leeway and flexibility and family and blessings to do that. Not many other people do. So that's exactly where I go. I go to the parts that nobody wants to go with themselves. Because how the hell are you supposed to do that on your own? It's the what you don't know, you don't know. That takes a tribe, and that takes trust. And that's exactly where I start and where all change happens. And it starts with trust. That not only me or the other people that I have on my team that are going to be able to help people discover these parts of themselves. And the best part is, it's a lot of fun. I go out with them, we go to places in the world, we go out in the real world, we're interacting with people, guys, girls, situations that are always so specific to the person. And I think it's awesome that we can do that in our day-to-day. Because Target isn't Target when you're an intentional person. It's another place to experience things for yourself.
So you had some content on your page.
Can I ask about if you're going to go somewhere else?
I mean,
Go
I
ahead.
was staying there, but go ahead.
Go ahead. No,
please.
go. I just wanted to ask for an example.
Do that.
I'm curious. Like, give me an example. Like you mentioned, and I think we lost you for a second.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned
I'm right here.
going to experiencing different things for different clients. A target's not a target when you're intentional. Just provide some more context on that. Give another tangible example, because I think that's super interesting.
Well, what I really want to do is get people off the retreats, get people out of the seminars, get people off the Zoom calls, off the Instagrams, off the Snapchats. And I'm only saying that because it hasn't really contributed anything to humanity. It's contributed to a select few that have so much power that if you stop doing this, they would lose their hundreds of billions of dollars. So I have an awareness and an understanding that the turn that we've taken is the anti-human route that supports a select few individuals who will eventually turn into gods in their mind. And they don't care about you or me. They don't give a shit. And they don't care about the people that are suffering. Because it's a very easy device to go ahead and remove your existence instantly. So the framework that I created, and it's actually something that I lived by, is realizing that if you live an intentional life, you're truly living a divine life. And where a target no longer becomes a target. And so, for example, I took my client out. I could just use this particular one that I used. We had a retreat out in Malibu, a one-on-one situation. But it's in Los Angeles. I didn't take you to the forest because your problems aren't in the forest. They're actually in the city, right? And that's where you need to be. You got to be where people are if you want to change the world. It sounds romantic where you could run off into a forest with the love of your life and think that you won't get BPD and an alcohol addiction and still scroll on TikTok. You absolutely will. So in his particular thing, I was showing him how we just went to this one place. We called it the mating zoo. I know it sounds a little sexist, but really it's actually what it was, right? Because when we went to the clubs, there was nothing really there. So we did a few things, and one of them was I really like to get people out of the fear of rejection, because the only way you can be yourself is if you're not afraid of rejection. Now, to what extent are you going to do it? To the point where you even go past embarrassment? Most people have never even experienced rejection. You should try it out. It's liberating. So we did a few things, and I can show you how that works. There's an intention, right? Every single one of you guys is looking and working for something right now. There's also a whole list of beliefs that you have about reality. Where do you test them? In reality. For example, here's a good belief to have. Women aren't as sexual as men are. That's going to be a really fun belief to break, isn't it? Especially if you believe it's right. Right, here's another belief that's really fun to break. Or I can't make money. You want to find out? It's going to be fun. And guess what? It's going to be antagonizing. And the reason what's going to make this hard work, it's not because it's hard to make money. It's because it's really hard to investigate the parts of yourself and the value that you have associated to wealth. You do this with others. If you're willing to open your mouth, I promise you this, you're willing to change your life. If you're willing to play the fool, you're willing to stumble on greatness. And so we did a few things. And one of them was, as I realized, okay, yeah, we got to get this guy out of his bubble. He has a lot of these beliefs. And let's bring them out into reality and let's challenge them, right? Oh, rejection is like the absolute. I'll get destroyed. That was what he had. And I said, oh, really? We went to a goth club. And at a goth club, if you're a Midwestern Christian boy, your likelihood of getting any girl's number is going to be 0. And so we're at this goth club, and he's looking at me with a smile. I know the goth club. I know what goth girls are like. I kind of was an emo kid growing up. So it was a place for me, but not for him. And he's like, dude, you're right. I have nothing to lose here because we're not the same people, right? And so just in that instant, he broke that belief around rejection. And he started approaching every goth girl there, and they were rejecting him like as if it was, like, you ever think about it, if a Jewish Orthodox girl met a Hollywood movie star, she'd reject him in an instant, and he'd be like, what, I'm not good enough, right? And I realized that, like, we're not for everybody. And so once he realized that, he's like, well, I'm for me. Let me go do me here. He started dancing like I've never seen a man dance before. He didn't care. He wasn't looking for anybody's approval, so the goth club already got him out of it. And then I said, now let's take the goth club into the regular mall that you go to in Malibu. And he was also really working on one thing, and a part of him was like a white knight. He'd stand up for a lot of destructive feminine behaviors. And I'll tell you this guy's story if you're down to do this. I really think that this would be actually quite insightful for a lot of people. So we go out to this one bar, and there's this girl there, and he's already now, like, his approach anxiety is gone. His fear around rejection doesn't exist anymore. It's no longer about seduction. It's never been about seduction. It's been about his authentic expression to feel good, right? Let's start there, and then you might become seductive, and that makes you capable. Now you got to have a system of values so that you're not a piece of shit, right? It's kind of simple framework. So we see this one girl at the mart, gorgeous blonde. And I look at him, and he looks at me, he smiles, he comes up to her, and he starts talking to her. By the way, just to let you know, this was a guy that was traumatized by these kind of experiences. Do you see a little bit of intention? It wasn't deep psychotherapy. It was changing the belief that was ingrained in you by perhaps your parents, your teacher, the rabbinical authority, the Catholic Church, and you have to be the one responsible to fight against the falsehood, because that's what we are, warriors, right? And we're going to fight against bullshit, whether with swords or with pens, but you better be ready, because you're going to have to be a confrontational son of a bitch. So he's now talking to this girl, and I'm noticing that she's not flirting with him. She's going for it. And I'm like, woo, oh, damn. She's got all gas. And I'm sitting in the conversation with her. She introduces me. And there was this sexuality that was just for everyone. She was just immediately taking it there. And that was also another thing for him, which is, what is the thing that a lot of men reject about themselves? Is, well, they live in a reality where women are these goddesses that they don't desire what you like. Actually, what you like is disgusting. And so he already opened up with his sexuality. He didn't start the conversation up and about, hey, you like the weather today? He had mentioned something about her energy and her femininity, and about how, like, she looks like a sex goddess, right? Immediately went there, which a lot of men are afraid to do because they reject it every 5 minutes, right? And then, of course, that picked up the sexual spice in the conversation. And I see she picks her hand up. She goes like this, and she has a ring that's the size of this SD chip. And I go, you're married. She goes, oh, I'm not married. We're just engaged. I was like, what? And it's interesting, and I'm here with my client. Remember, this is just the first few days of our program. Watch how specific that interaction was to the things that he was attracting and needed to learn in this process. I don't do like, hey, sign up for my program. We'll help you with the mechanical engineered system. No, it's life. This is spiritual, dude. We're all doing this together. I'm not a god. We're all man. So what ends up happening is then I go, wait, 1 second. Okay, where's your husband? I say it again. And then she's like, oh, he's at home right now. And I said, mm-mm. And she was like, what? What was that mm-mm? And I was like, well, you don't want to have this conversation with me. I work in relationships. This doesn't sound good. And what she was speaking about prior was how she was going to go to this 28th solstice party. And I was like, what are you going to an orgy for? Right? She just laughed because everything we were talking about was just like, I guess you could say a lot of play. And I guess he wasn't coming. And so I said, these are all not looking good. You know, how long have you guys been dating? And then eventually I started to get down to the nitty-gritty with her. I said, look, if you're down to have this open conversation with me, let's do it. We're at a coffee shop in Malibu, as everybody else is going to go about their life on their 9 to 5, as I'm having a deeply spiritual conversation with a total stranger about her marriage. He's there with me in the conversation, recognizing the depths of this. Now, what was the conversation about? It was about how. I said, you're not sexually satisfied. Was the first thing I told her. And she's like, what? What do you mean? Why do you say that? And I said, well, because you're unaware also of your nature about how you're aggressively flirting with 2 guys that you don't know, and you're engaged. What is that saying about you? And she's like, what do you mean is that saying about me? And I said, you're highly narcissistic. And immediately she fucking got triggered, and she had a Glock, she would have shot me. And I said, she was like, wow, what do you mean by that? And I said, well, if you'd like me to explain, I could. So I go ahead and explain it to her. I said, this need for attention and also this lack of satisfaction that you have through your sexuality and your relationship is starting to manifest itself in this conversation, and you're also unaware of the things that you're doing. And I said, let me guess, did you make your boyfriend wait for 4 months? She made her boyfriend wait for 4 months. And that's not her typical action. That's not her typical behavior, right? Her typical behavior was her authentic self with us, which is let's move quick, let's move fast, let's have fun, which I'm down for. And I love. But what I often noticed is that they're both her partners, her and her partner, were living in this delusion. And eventually she said, it's fine, vibrators are great. And I said, okay, well, I think we already understand the situation and how dark this is going to get. But I said, honestly, there's something that you should do. And I said, he's very agreeable. And he's repressing all of the things that he really feels in this relationship. And my client steps in and goes, holy shit, that was me in the relationship that I was in, that I left, that made me join the program. And he was like, no fucking way. Now, here's the crazy thing that started to happen. After this girl left, it was a very positive interaction, because you'd be shocked. Some people are looking for answers, and perhaps I gave her the answer she's looking for. Don't marry a guy that doesn't turn you on, because guess what? The guys that turn her on always hurt her. So what did she do? She went for the safe bet. The number one indicator that you're going to cheat on him, especially if you're narcissistic. That's the safe bet, compounded by a lack of awareness. You'll cheat on your partner, just like that, and you'll rationalize too, just like she was. So my client's driving with me in the car and he's like, dude, I don't believe this. I have so much work that I need to do around my ex. The next day, the client that I sold to my program's name was Jacqueline. The person that we went to have lunch at the restaurant was Jacqueline. And then, of course, the waitress was Jacqueline. That was his ex-girlfriend's name. There's a certain point where those who seek truth, God will answer. Because you're going to have to be willing to accept this journey and the commitment that you're going to have to take in this process. I've experienced things that don't really line up with the status quo in any way whatsoever. They don't happen over a screen. They happen in reality, and it's very hard to create unless you're a truly creative individual who's an artist. And I think that's the only way that we could really connect to those kind of occurrences. But my God, man, when I say that this is exactly what helps people, is an intentional life and a discovery of the beliefs that are inhibiting you from becoming the best version of yourself, which is why you're here. That's actually why you're here. It's why self-development is borderline cult-like, and it pulls like a religion does. And a lot of us think that this isn't religion. The people that are listening to this said, fuck the Catholic Church. And they're here listening to probably 2 Christians, if I'm not wrong, and a Jew. So at the end of the day, what's really making people make the decisions that they're making is the beliefs that they have, and that this is a deeply religious experience. Everything we do is a ritual. And here we are, talking about wisdom, right? It's what brings people together, is that there's clearly this like godliness within us that does this. So really my content's borderline spiritual, but psychological simultaneously, and human. And that's the way that I like to keep it.
So, I mean, one, this client surrounded by Jacquelines can probably write you a priceless testimonial. So if you haven't already gotten one, it seems too good to be true. But wanted to ask, because there's so many different branches of knowledge I feel that you're pulling from. So if somebody listens to this conversation and they're like, hey, this guy is singing to me right now, I really want to just crack open a book and dive further into this, like, what's the first book we open up? Who's like some of your top influences in terms of where you're getting this outlook from? I'm asking selfishly, but I also think that I'm doing a service to anyone who listens to this conversation.
God bless you. I love how you said that, man. So there, you know, it's really interesting. I have a very playful process with this. I haven't read a book until I was 21 years old. The only book that I ever read from ages, I guess, like 3 to like 20 was the Old Testament, because that was something I always believed in as just something to have, you know, as like a quick draw. But I never like enjoyed it. I hated reading. So I was left with like another particular route of development, right? Because most people go, what's the book that you read? And actually the things that really influenced me was film. Movies influenced the absolute hell out of me. And so I realized that there was a few films that really have. And I think the films that really have influenced my life were the ones that really shape the things that I do. The people that I look up to are the people that I looked up to on screen, you know? And of course, you know, my father, my brothers. I feel like that's the more cliche response, but the one that was like really personal to me was being able to look at a screen and realize you could do the same dance, and you could feel what that person's feeling. And a few people have been a serious inspiration in my life. On a philosophical level, of course, you can just say that Jordan Peterson was somebody that made you realize that psychology is kind of badass, right? And personal development and self-help isn't always run by con artists. So that already.
You said something earlier. You said something earlier about where Jordan Peterson popped into my head. I'm like, oh, he either got this from Jordan Peterson or he listens to Jordan Peterson, because I picked up on it.
Yeah, I mean, for sure, I have a lot of influences there. Matthew McConaughey was a serious influence in my life. When I came out of my relationship, I had like easy personality split, where like every single past trauma that ever happened didn't exist. My voice stopped 3 decibels. I started sounding like Matthew McConaughey.
Dude, I was gonna say you sound like Matthew McConaughey.
He's insane. I didn't know what it was, but I'm there fucking COVID 2020 with my legs crossed, and I'm watching this dude, and I'm like, no way, I'm in love. And I didn't know what was happening to me, but I was being hypnotized, genuinely hypnotized by the person. I didn't know. Not everybody's like Matthew McConaughey. I want to be like him. It turns out he's also a professor. So I'm like, well, that's interesting. You know, Carl Jung had a serious influence on my life. The religious work I've raised with, the Old Testament, is probably the only book people should ever read. And I'm not saying this on a religious perspective. I'm saying this if you want to understand something about humanity as a whole. You'll also be deeply inspired, because that is the book of books. It's inspired every other story as you know it to this day. And I found that very interesting. I modeled myself after a few characters that really helped me grow personally. Ryan Gosling from Stupid Crazy Love. That movie allowed me to realize, hey, you got to tap into that part of you. You got to see that. Sean Connery in the original James Bond films. There was nobody more charming with fewer words. With more grace. You know, a man on a mission still knows how to play. That was a very essential part of my life. Robert Downey Jr. is one of those people that somebody never experienced so much adversity and so much authenticity simultaneously. The guy got paid $500 million to be himself. And, you know, even watching the movie Interstellar, those films are divine works. And the movie Blade Runner, all of those things can teach you something if you're intentional about it. And so I really didn't look so much to books. I looked to film. And film really spoke to me. I didn't watch film like, fun time, cool scene, bad scene. I identified with the characters. I didn't judge them. And I realized how much like the characters I am, because why would it speak to me unless there's a part of me that resonates with the character? So then when it comes to books, there's a series of books, but I really think that those were more of just cherries on the top than the things that really influenced me and inspired me. The things that really changed my life was looking at the people that I wanted to be like and taking it into the real world. Like when I started playing Robert Downey Jr., I'd wear the colored lenses. And eventually it actually started to sound like him. I actually mimicked a lot of him. It was like kind of crazy, but when you need Jarvis to get you on a call because you're all booked up with clients, you know, you just got to do what you got to do. So although it's acting, and this was something for me that my dad taught me, I realized that that's more true about us. We're all actors. And actually, you just need to act like you. And that's the hardest role to play. And that you can find these sub-roles throughout your life of who you need to be. And then I was like, okay, put the McConaughey away. He's becoming protective, right? Oh, that's too much Robert Downey. You became an egotistical maniac. All right, way too much James Bond. You're in a fantasy now. So, opposed to like picking up the books and reading, I want you to look at the characters that you've looked up to. And you might even feel weird about it. You're not like, okay, why am I looking up to Iron Man? And you're like, well, a part of me is highly capable, very arrogant, along with that. Not everybody looks up to the same characters, and that's the crazy part that we're not accepting here. You know, these are stories. And those stories, you don't just need to read them, you need to experience them. You need to feel them. Books allow you to feel things. Information is not what we're looking for. What we're looking for is elevated emotion. And the only way you can access this elevated emotion is what I believe is through playing the characters that you resonate with that are secretly you.
Got it. So, because at first it sounds like you're just picking parts of the characters you like and you're building this Frankenstein of a person, but then it's like, then that further disconnects you from who you are. But really you're identifying with, deep down, you're identifying with certain qualities of these characters. And so, in some ways, it's maybe even helped validate or create visibility for you to truly understand and see yourself for who you really are. Did I connect that correctly?
Right? And now, so for opposed to the classic framework of you pick up a book, you got to read it. the most difficult things to do in life is to wear the suit of the man that you want to be. I don't know if you guys ever seen the show Lucifer.
I've heard of it. I've seen maybe an episode.
Well, he's quick, he's funny, he's sharp, and he's seductive. And I was like watching the show, of course, during this breakup. It was like I was being secretly hypnotized by God. I promise you. Nothing happens by accident. Look at your life. You didn't waste it. I promise you. Look at it. You have everything you ever needed if you're awake today, which is why I focus on one thing, waking people up. Because then they're like, okay, well, what do I got? Well, I got everything that I need. And that's exactly the point. You had everything that you need. So I watched that show, and it was something interesting is that I wouldn't like, okay, let me go read a book. What I said is, okay, let me play the devil. Why? I was doing shadow integration. So I had an intention, bring out the darkness. Well, what's the embodiment of the darkness? The devil, right? That's represented in the duality alongside with God. So there's not complete total darkness. And I'd wear the suit, all black. It was an Armani suit. I went out and bought it. I didn't have $1,000 to spend, but I did anyways. And then I bought myself the shoes that he wears too. And I went out every night wearing that. And it was something very interesting is that within a couple weeks, I met this girl who I dated for 4 months, who was quite literally the embodiment of my shadow. So you can go and pick up your journal. I just promise you, there's far more sex on the other side of what I'm talking about here. There's far more love. There's far more friendship. There's far more connection. There's far more adventure. And there's a lot of friendship along the way. Because nobody wants to do this alone. I didn't do this alone. I had a friend at the time that was a Peter Pan that was willing to take it anywhere. But my God, through a little bit of acting and the appropriate film to watch, you walk into life with inspiration. You know, the necessity for art is like the necessity for beauty in women. If that begins to deteriorate in the society, the quality of men deteriorates. If the quality of art deteriorates, our society deteriorates. If the true determination of the society is through its art, I think it could be one of those philosophers. But somebody said that, not me. And that's really what we're looking for is inspiration. And honestly, information is overrated. It's so overrated. I read Carl Jung's psychological types and then all of his books. People couldn't understand me when I spoke. I felt in my mind so cool right now. But brother, I was ineffective with people. I wasn't Naftali. I turned into Jordan Peterson. And then I started losing people. I started losing clients. I was literally talking about the archetypes. Like, who the fuck? Okay, that was his thing. I like archetypes too, but I like the modern symbols because I relate to the modern symbols. And so now I take a little bit of perhaps that Peterson-esque feel to it, and I bring it into the things that I really connect to. And that's the thing that's most difficult in life. It's the things that's never been done, the things that you connect to. And your ability to realize that is where all your success is going to come from. Really realize that you're responsible for your life. And let's start there. You know, there's so much emotions that you can take into your day for action. And I did this. I started feeling more, so much. My life no longer, I felt old at 21, but at 22, I was the oldest I was ever going to get. I froze in time. I'm not a day older. And God willing, I can do that for the rest of my life, for as long as I live.
How old are you?
24.
All right, because you just said like 3 years
Simple
ago.
math.
Yeah, okay. Just want to make sure I heard that correctly because not many 24-year-olds sound like you. So.
All right, Naftali, we're gonna wrap up. Thank you so much, man, for your wisdom. I'm sitting in my chair just in awe at some of the what's been imparted on me, and I'm feeling super driven to attack the rest of the week as a result of this conversation. So, super
Really?
appreciative and grateful for your time and wisdom, man. We appreciate you.
God bless you guys. Thank you so much for having me on. It was really a pleasure, and would love to see you guys again, hopefully in the LA area.
Yes, sir.